The following is a sermon by Alexander Maclaren. If you'd like to read more from Alexander Maclaren and his sermons on expositions of Holy Scripture, you can do so with the link provided down below in the video description, provided and assembled by ccel.org. The title of this sermon is A Strait Betwixt Two. The passage is Philippians 1, verses 21 through 25. To me to live is Christ, and to die is gain. But if I live in the flesh, this is the fruit of my labor. Yet what I shall choose I wot not. For I am in a strait betwixt two, having a desire to depart, and to be with Christ, which is far better. Nevertheless, to abide in the flesh is more needful for you. And having this confidence, I know that I shall abide and continue with you, all for your furtherance and joy of faith. A preacher may well shrink from such a text. Its elevation of feeling and music of expression make all sermons on it sound feeble and harsh, like some poor shepherd's pipe after an organ. But, though this be true, it may not be useless to attempt at least to point out the course of thought in these grand words. They flow like a great river, which springs at first with a strong jet from some deep cave, then is torn and chafed among dividing rocks, and after a troubled middle course, moves at last with stately and equable current to the sea. The apostles' thoughts and feelings have here, as it were, a threefold bent in their flow. First, we have the clear, unhesitating statement of the comparative advantages of life and death to a Christian man, when thought of as affecting himself alone. The one is Christ, the other gain. But we neither live nor die to ourselves, and no man has a right to think of life or death only from the point of view of his own advantage. So the problem is not so simple as it looked. Life here is the condition of fruitful labor here. There are his brethren and his work to think of. These bring him to a stand and check the rising wish. He knows not which state to prefer. The stream is dammed back between rocks, and it chafes and foams and seems to lose its way among them. Then comes a third bend in the flow of thought and feeling, and he gladly apprehends it as his present duty to remain at his work. If his own joy is thereby less, his brethren's will be more. If he is not to depart and be with Christ, he will remain and be with Christ's friends, which is, in some sort, being with him too. If he may not have the gain of death, he will have the fruit of work in life. Let us try to fill up somewhat this meager outline of the warm stream that pours through these great words. First, the simplicity of the comparison between life and death to a Christian thinking of himself alone. To me, is plainly emphatic. It means more than in my judgment or even in my case. It is equal to me personally, if I stood alone and had no one to consider but myself. To live refers mainly here to outward practical life of service, and to die should perhaps rather be to be dead, referring not to the act of dissolution, but to the state after, not to the entrance chamber, but to the palace to which it admits. So we have here grandly set forth the simplicity and unity of the Christian life. While the words probably refer mainly to outward life, they presuppose an inward of which that outward is the expression. In every possible phase of the word life, Christ is the life of the Christian. To live is Christ, for he is the mystical source from whom all ours flows. With thee is the fountain of life. And all life, both of body and spirit, is from him, by him, and in him. To live is Christ, for he is the aim and object, as well as the Lord of it all, and no other is worth calling life, but that which is for him by willing consecration, as well as from him by constant derivation. To live is Christ, for he is the model of all our life, and the one all-sufficient law for us is to follow him. Life is to be as Christ, for Christ, by, in, and from Christ. So shall there be strength, peace, and freedom in our days. The unity brought into life thereby will issue in calm blessedness, contrasted wondrously with the divided hearts and aims which fritter our days into fragments and make our lives heaps of broken links instead of chains. Surely this is the charm which brings rest into the most troubled history and nobleness into the lowliest duties. There is nothing so grand as the unity breathed into our else distracted days by the all-pervading reference to and presence of Christ. Without that, we are like the mariners of the old world, who crept timidly from headland to headland, making each their aim for a while and leaving each inevitably behind, never losing sight of shore, nor ever knowing the wonders of the deep and all the majesty of mid-ocean, nor ever touching the happy shores beyond, which they reach who carry in their hearts a compass that ever points to the unseen pole. Then comes the other great thought, that where life is simply Christ, death will be simply gain. Paul no doubt shrank from the act of death, as we all do. It was not the narrow passage which attracted him, but the broad land beyond. Every other aspect of that was swallowed up in the one great thought which will occupy us more at length presently. But that word gain suggests that to Paul's confident faith, death was but an increase and progression in all that was good here. To him it was no loss to lose flesh and sense and all the fleeting joys with which they link us. To him death was no destruction of his being, and not even an interruption of its continuity. Everything that was of any real advantage to him was to be his after as before. The change was clear gain. Everything good was to be just as it had been, only better. Nothing was to be dropped, but what it was progress to lose, and whatever was kept was to be heightened. How strongly does that view express the two thoughts of the continuity and intensifying of the Christian life beyond the grave! And what a contrast does that simple, sublime confidence present to many after another thought of death. To how many men its blackness seems to be the sudden swallowing up of the light of their very being. To how many more does it seem to put an end to all their occupations and to shear their lives in twain as remorselessly as the fall of the guillotine severs the head from the body? How are the light butterfly wings of the trivialities in which many men and women spend their days to carry them across the awful gulf? What are the people to do on the other side whose lives have all been given to purposes and tasks that stop on this side? Are there shops and mills or warehouses and drawing rooms or studies and lecture halls over there? Will the lives which have not struck their roots down through all the surface soil to the rock bear transplanting? Alas, for the 1,000 landed in that new country, as unfit for it by the tenor of their past occupations, as some pale artisan with delicate fingers and feeble muscles set down as a colonist to clear the forest. This Paul had a work here which he could carry on hereafter. There would be no reversal of view, no change in the fundamental character of his occupations. True, the special forms of work which he had pursued here would be left behind, but the principle underlying them would continue. It matters very little to the servant whether he is out in the cold and wet plowing and tending cattle, or whether he is waiting on his master at table. It is service all the same, only it is warmer and lighter in the house than in the field, and it is promotion to be made an indoor servant. So the direction of the life and the source of the life and the fundamentals of the life continue unchanged. Everything is as it was, only in the superlative degree. To other men, the narrow plane on which their low-lying lives are placed is rimmed by the jagged, forbidding white peaks. It is cold and dreary on these icy summits where no creature can live. Perhaps there is land on the other side, but who knows? The pale barrier separates all here from all there. We know not what may be on the other side. Only we feel that the journey is long and chill, that the ice and the barren stone appall, and that we never can carry our household goods, our tools, or our wealth with us up to the black jaws of the pass. But for this man, the Alps were tunneled. There was no interruption in his progress. He would go, he believed, without break of gauge, and would pass through the darkness, scarcely knowing when it came, and certainly unchecked for even a moment, right on to the other side where he would come out, as travelers to Italy do, to fairer plains and bluer skies, to richer harvests and a warmer sun. No jolt, no pause, no momentary suspension of consciousness, no reversal, nor even interruption in his activity did Paul expect death to bring him, but only continuance and increase of all that was essential to his life. He has calmness in his confidence. There is nothing hysterical or overwrought or morbid in these words, so peaceful in their trust, so moderate and restrained in their rapture. Are our anticipations of the future molded on such a pattern? Do we think of it as quietly as this man did? Are we as tranquilly sure about it? Is there as little mist of uncertainty about the clearly defined image to our eye as there was to his? Is our confidence so profound that these brief monosyllables are enough to state it? Above all, do we know that to die will be gain because we can honestly say that to live is Christ? If so, our hope is valid and will not yield when we lean heavily upon it for support in the ford over the black stream. If our hope is built on anything besides, it will snap then like a rotten pole and leave us to stumble helpless among the slippery stones and the icy torrent. The second movement of thought here, which troubles and complicates this simple decision as to what is the best for Paul himself, is the hesitation springing from the wish to help his brethren. As we said, no man has a right to forget others in settling the question whether he would live or die. We see the apostle here brought to a stand by two conflicting currents of feelings. For himself, he would gladly go. For his friend's sake, he is drawn to the opposite choice. He has fallen into a place where two seas meet, and for a minute or two his will is buffeted from side to side by the violence of the waves. The obscurity of his language arising from its broken construction corresponds to the struggle of his feelings. As the Revised Version has it, if to live in the flesh, if this is the fruit of my work, then what shall I choose I wot not. By which fragmentary sentence, rightly representing as it does the roughness of the Greek, we understand him to mean that if living on in this life is the condition of his gaining fruit from his toil, then he has to check the rising wish and is hindered from decisive preference either way. Both motives act upon him, one drawing him deathward, the other holding him firmly here. He is in a dilemma, pinned in, as it were, between the two opposing pressures. On the one hand, he has the desire, not a desire, as the English Bible has it, as if it were but one among many, turned towards departing to be with Christ. But on the other, he knows that his remaining here is for the present all but indispensable for the immature faith of the churches which he has founded. So he stands in doubt for a moment, and the picture of his hesitation may well be studied by us. Such a reason for wishing to die in conflict with such a reason for wishing to live is as noble as it is rare, and thank God as imitable as it is noble. Notice the aspect which death wore to his faith. He speaks of it as departing, a metaphor which does not, like many of the flattering appellations which men give that last enemy, reveal a quaking dread which cannot bear to look him in his ashen pale face. Paul calls him gentle names because he fears him not at all. To him all the dreadfulness, the mystery, the pain, and the solitude have melted away, and death has become a mere change of place. The word literally means to unloose, and is employed to express pulling up the tent pegs of a shifting encampment, or drawing up the anchor of a ship. In either case, the image is simply that of removal. It is but striking the earthly house of this tent. It is but one more day's march, of which we have had many already, though this is over Jordan. It is but the last day's journey, and tomorrow there will be no packing up in the morning and resuming our weary tramp, but we shall be at home and go no more out. so has the awful thing at the end dwindled, and the brighter and greater the land behind it shines, the smaller does it appear. The apostle thinks little of dying because he thinks so much of what comes after. Who is afraid of a brief journey if a meeting with dear friends long lost is at the end of it? The narrow avenue seems short, and its roughness and darkness are nothing because Jesus Christ stands with outstretched arms at the other end, beckoning us to himself, as mothers teach their children to walk. Whosoever is sure that he will be with Christ can afford to smile at death and call it but a shifting of place. And whosoever feels the desire to be with Christ will not shrink from the means by which that desire is fulfilled, with the agony of revulsion that it excites in many an imagination. It will always be solemn, and its physical accompaniments of pain and struggle will always be more or less of a terror, and the parting even for a time from our dear ones will always be loss. But nevertheless, if we see Christ across the gulf, and know that one struggle more and we shall clasp him with inseparable hands, with joy and bliss in overmeasure forever, we shall not dread the leap. One thought about the future should fill our minds as it did Paul's, that it is to be with Christ. How different that nobly simple expectation, resolving all bliss into the one element, is from the morbid curiosity as to details, which vulgarises and weakens so much of even devout anticipation of the future. To us as to him, heaven should be Christ and Christ should be heaven. All the rest is but accident. Golden harps and crowns and hidden manna and white robes and thrones and all the other representations are but symbols of the blessedness of union with him, or consequences of it. Immortal life and growth and perfection both of mind and heart, and the cessation of all that disturbs, and our investiture with glory and honor flung around our poor natures like a royal robe over a naked body, are all but the many-sided brightness that pour out from him, and bathe in their rainbowed light those who are with him. To be with Christ is all we need. For the loving heart, to be near him is enough. I shall clasp thee again, O soul of my soul, and with God be the rest. Let us not fritter away our imaginations and our hopes on the subordinate and non-essential accompaniments, but concentrate all their energy on the one central thought. Let us not lose this gracious image in the maze of symbols that, though precious, are secondary. Let us not inquire with curiosity that will find no answer about the unrevealed wonders and staggering mysteries of that transcendent thought, life everlasting. Let us not acquire the habit of thinking of the future as the perfecting of our humanity without connecting all our speculations with him, whose presence will be all of heaven to us all. But let us keep his serene figure ever clear before our imaginations in all the blaze of the light, and try to feed our hopes and stay our hearts on this aspect of heavenly blessedness as the all-embracing one, that all, each for himself, shall be forever conscious of Christ's loving presence and of the closest union with him, a union in comparison with which the dearest and sacredest blendings of heart with heart and life with life are cold and distant. For the clearness of our hope, the fewer the details, the better. For the willingness with which we turn from life and face the inevitable end, it is very important that we should have that one thought disengaged from all others. The one full moon which dims all the stars draws the tides after it. These lesser lights may gem the darkness and dart down white shafts of brilliance and quivering reflections of the waves, but they have no power to move their mass. It is Christ and Christ only who draws us across the gulf to be with him, and reduces death to a mere shifting of our encampment. This is a noble and worthy reason for wishing to die, not because Paul is disappointed and sick of life, not because he's weighed down with sorrow or pain or loss or toil, but because he would like to be with his master. He is no morbid sentimentalist. He is cherishing no unwholesome longing. He is not weary of work. He indulges in no hysterical raptures or desire. What an eloquent simplicity is in the quiet, very far better. It goes straight to one's heart and says more than paragraphs of falsetto yearnings. There is nothing in such a wish to die, based on such a reason, that the most manly and wholesome piety needs be ashamed of. It is a pattern for us all. The attraction of life contends with the attraction of heaven in these verses. That is a conflict which many good men know something of, but which does not take the shape with many of us which it assumed with Paul. Drawn as he is by the supreme desire of close union with his master, for the sake of which he is ready to depart, he is tugged back even more strongly by the thought that if he stays here, he can go on working and gaining results from his labor. It does not follow that he did not expect service if he were with Christ. We may be very sure that Paul's heaven was no idle heaven, but one of happy activity and larger service. But he will not be able to help these dear friends at Philippi and elsewhere who need him, as he knows. So love to them drags at his skirts and ties him here. One can scarcely miss the remarkable contrast between Paul's "to abide in the flesh is more needful for you," and the saying of Paul's master to people who assuredly needed his presence more than Philippi needed Paul's. "It is expedient for you that I go away." This is not the place to work out the profound significance of the contrast and the questions which it raises as to whether Christ expected his work to be finished and his helpfulness ended by his death as Paul did his. It must suffice to have suggested the comparison. Returning to our text, such a reason for wishing to die, held in check and overcome by such a reason for wishing to live, is great and noble. There are few of us who would not own to the mightier attraction of life, but how few of us who feel that for ourselves personally, if we were free to think only of ourselves, we should be glad to go, because we should be closer to Christ, but that we hesitate for the sake of others whom we think we can help. Many of us cling to life with a desperate clutch, like some poor wretch pushed over a precipice and trying to dig his nails into the rock as he falls. Some of us cling to it because we dread what is beyond, and our longing to live is the measure of our dread to die. But Paul did not look forward to a thick darkness of judgment or to nothingness. He saw in the darkness a great light, the light in the windows of his Father's house. And yet he turned willingly away to his toil in the field, and was more than content to drudge on as long as he could do anything by his work. Blessed are they who share his desire to depart and his victorious willingness to stay here and labor. They shall find that such a life in the flesh too is being with Christ. Thirdly, thus the stream of thought passes the rapids and flows on smoothly to its final phase of peaceful acquiescence. That is expressed very beautifully in the closing verse. Having this confidence, I know that I shall abide and continue with you all for your furtherance and joy in faith. Self is so entirely overcome that he puts away his own desire to enter into their joy and rejoices with them. He cannot yet have for himself the blessedness which his spirit seeks. Well be it so, he will stop here and find a blessedness in seeing them growing in confidence and knowledge of Christ and in the gladness that comes from it. He gives up the hope of that higher companionship with Jesus, which drew him so mightily. Well be it so, he will have companionship with his brethren, and abiding with you all, may haply find, even before the day of final account, that to visit Christ's little ones is to visit Christ. Therefore he fuses his opposing wishes into one. He is no more in a strait betwixt two, or unwitting what he shall choose. He chooses nothing, but accepts the appointment of a higher wisdom. There is rest for him as for us in ceasing from our own wishes and laying our will silent and passive at his feet. The true attitude for us in which to face the unknown future with its dim possibilities, and especially the supreme alternative of life or death, is neither desire nor reluctance nor a hesitation compounded by both, but trustful acquiescence. Such a temper is far from indifference, and as far from agitation. In all things, and most of all in regard to these matters, it is best to hold desire in equilibrium till God shall speak. Torture not yourself with hopes or fears. They make us their slaves. Put your hand in God's hand, and let him guide you as he will. Wishes are bad steersmen. We are only at peace when desires and dreads are, if not extinct, at all events held tightly in. Rest and wisdom and strength come with acquiescence. Let us say with Richard Baxter in his simple, noble words, Lord, it belongs not to my care whether I die or live. To love and serve thee is my share, and that thy grace must give. We may learn, too, that we may be quite sure that we shall be left here as long as we are needed. Paul knew that his stay was needful, so he could say, I know that I shall abide with you. We do not, but we may be sure that if our stay is needful, we shall abide. We are always tempted to think ourselves indispensable, but thank God nobody is necessary. There are no irreparable losses, hard as it is to believe it. We look at our work, at our families, our businesses, our congregations, our subjects of study, and we say to ourselves, what will become of them when I am gone? Everything would fall to pieces if I were withdrawn. Do not be afraid. Depend on it. You will be left here as long as you are wanted. There are no incomplete lives and no premature removals. To the eye of faith, the broken column in our cemeteries is a sentimental falsehood. No Christian life is broken short off so, but rises in a symmetrical shaft, and its capital is garlanded with amaranthine flowers in heaven. In one sense, all our lives are incomplete, for they and their issues are above, out of our sight here. In another, none are, for we are immortal till our work is done. The true attitude, then, for us is patient service till he withdraws us from the field. We do not count him a diligent servant who is always wearying for the hour of leaving off to strike. Be it ours to labor where he puts us, patiently waiting till death's mild curfew sets us free from the long day's work and sends us home. Brethren, there are but two theories of life, two corresponding aspects of death. The one says, to me to live is Christ and to die is gain. The other, to me to live is self and to die is loss and despair. One or the other must be your choice. Which?